homesteaders, gardeners, and cooks. My name is Jennifer. Welcome to Miles Away Farm, or welcome back. We are up here in my commercial kitchen today because I'm making a couple of products for sale, but I thought I'd bring you along and show you how it's done in case you want to make these in smaller quantities in your own kitchen. So there's going to be two videos here, but one of them is going to be sun-dried tomato pesto, which is absolutely delicious and definitely one of my favorite recipes. And you can make this any time of year because it's made with dried tomatoes rather than fresh tomatoes. So if you've got a stash of dried tomatoes from this summer and you're looking for creative things to do with it, I highly recommend this recipe. This originated in the book Animal Vegetable Miracle by Barbara Kingsolver, and I've been making it for about 20 years. And then secondly, we're gonna make homemade fresh horseradish. And both of these products can be frozen for later use. Homemade dried tomato pesto and homemade horseradish. Let's get started. All right, the recipe will be down below for a normal human-sized serving. I'm making 36 ounces of this today for sale because I sell them in 6-ounce containers, and I'm making 6 of them. This is my not sun-dried, but dehydrated heirloom tomatoes, and I sell these whole in bags for people, and then the ones that are kind of scratch and dent where they have a bit of a hole because of where the tomato was cut, or it's the end piece, and so there's quite a bit of skin. I save those and put them aside for this recipe specifically because everything gets ground and it doesn't matter. And some of these tomatoes are from this year, and some of these tomatoes are actually from, I think, 2022. So some of these are a couple of years old. Dried tomatoes last forever, so not a big deal to have these sitting in your cupboard for a good long time. What I'm gonna do is pour boiling filtered water over these. And in my case, it's filtered just because we're on well water. And so I want to avoid the minerals. So we're going to let that soak for 10 or 15 minutes just to rehydrate those so that they're soft enough to easily grind up in a food processor. Because if we were to try to grind them completely dry, the resulting pesto would come out too dry. I'm also going to take walnuts, and you can use any nut that you like in this. It doesn't have to be walnuts. I think that was what was in the original recipe, and I really like the taste of walnuts in this recipe. And I'm going to put them on a cookie sheet and bake them in a 350-degree oven for about 5 minutes, just to put a little toast on those to bring out the flavor. All right, these have been in here for 5 minutes, and then I turned the heat off because I was in the middle of something else. So they've probably been in here 7 or 8 minutes altogether. And I'm not trying to brown them, I'm just trying to release the oils and warm them up a little bit. And generally, my rule of thumb on this is if I can smell them, they're done, because you'll definitely start to smell them as they warm up in the oven. And so set a timer. 5 minutes is a good starting point. But when you start to get that roasty smell of nuts, that's a good indication that they're ready. And our tomatoes are still soaking. We're gonna give these a few more minutes. All right, I think these tomatoes have soaked for long enough. I'm gonna let these sit and drain for a few minutes because I don't want things to be too soggy. I'm going to start adding things to our food processor. This is a Cuisinart 14-cup food processor recommended by America's Test Kitchen. And I don't love it just because I think the feed tube being on the back instead of the front makes no sense. And I always start to put it on wrong, and it's very easy to put it on wrong and then break off tabs. But other than that, it's a very nice machine. Here's our drained tomatoes. You can see just from letting those sit for a little while, we got a little bit more liquid out of them. So we're looking for the tomatoes to be softened up, but not soggy. And I'm just gonna give this a quick blitz before I start adding everything else. And I'm gonna pulse it rather than turn it on, because that initial pulse of this motor tends to be stronger than when it's just going around. And so you'll get more cutting action if you're trying to cut something up that's a little bit tough. They're gonna get ground a lot, so this is just an initial pulse just to break them up. I'm not expecting them to be total paste at this point. To this, I'm gonna add our walnuts. And again, the smaller size recipe for this, guys, is in the description. And you can actually look up the original recipe. I think the Animal Vegetable Miracle website is still up all these years later. I've converted everything over to weight instead of volume, just because I need to be able to be consistent in a commercial kitchen. I'm also adding in my garlic, and there's quite a bit of garlic in this recipe. We're gonna pulse that until things start to break down. And because this is pretty thick, we might need to stir it a bit. And this will loosen up when we add the olive oil, but I like to have things broken down a little bit before that happens. I'm gonna add everything else in here so that we get loosened up. I'm gonna add some balsamic vinegar. You could also use sherry vinegar if you had that on hand. Apple cider vinegar would also work. Some salt. Small pinch of red pepper flake, optional of course. Our dried basil. And our Parmesan. We'll see if that vinegar loosened this up at all before I start adding the oil. Oh, a little bit. To this, I'm gonna start adding our olive oil. The nice thing about this food processor is this part has a tiny little hole in the bottom. And so you can fill that up and it will drizzle in there as the processor is going so that you don't have to dump it all in at once. And that should start loosening things up pretty good. I'm gonna stop and scrape that down. And a normal sized batch is not gonna be quite the job for a food processor that this is. This is about the max that this food processor can do. I'm really filling this thing up. All right, I think that's probably about done. We have a nice, evenly mixed mash. And I don't want this to be completely smooth like baby food. I want there to be little bits of nuts in there and maybe little bits of tomato. But for the most part, this is where we want it. It should be finished. We'll give it a little bit more of a stir once we get that mixing paddle out of there, and then we'll dish it up. All right, I'm gonna start dishing this up. And I like to fill these partway full and then go back through and fill them a second time. That way, if things are not quite fully mixed, we get some from the bottom and some from the top. There's definitely a little bit of chunky nut in there. It's been a while since I've made this. It probably wouldn't have hurt to have ground the nuts and the garlic before putting the tomatoes in, so that I was ensured that those were gonna be ground really fine. So in retrospect, that would be a good idea. But each one of these is gonna get a total of 6 ounces. And this smells absolutely amazing, you guys. That balsamic vinegar in there really works with the dried tomatoes. It's a fabulous mix. And I'm trying really hard to not smear this all over the container, mostly for presentation. These are great little plastic tamper-proof containers where once you close them, the only way to open them is to rip a seam. And so it's obvious if they've been messed with, which is very nice for fresh product that I'm not gonna be in control of the entire time. And I never know quite how much of this I'm gonna end up with, simply because I don't know how much water those tomatoes are gonna absorb. And so even though I start with a set weight of tomatoes, once they've soaked, they expand, and I don't know exactly what I'm gonna get. I always make the recipe slightly bigger than what I actually need, just so that I don't accidentally end up short, because that is awful when that happens. All right, these are finished. I ended up getting 7 and then a little bit of extra. And I'm gonna top these with a little bit of extra olive oil, and that is gonna help keep these from turning brown and oxidizing as they sit. And so I'm just gonna go through with the back of a spoon and smooth this out so that that olive oil sits fairly even on there. Olive oil is kind of an expensive ingredient, so I don't want to put more than I really need to in here. And then I have a little bit of extra that I will just throw into my own freezer. And aside from just obviously using this on pasta, it would be really good on a chicken pasta. You could use it as a marinade for chicken as well, but I like to use it as a base for pizza instead of traditional pizza sauce. It makes a very nice pizza sauce. And these are all slightly over 6 ounces, and so I'm not too worried about it. If I lose a little bit to the back of the spoon here, the hardest part is not getting the lids in the other containers. Take off one of my gloves because it's all oily, and I'm just going to top these with, I don't know, between a teaspoon and a tablespoon of olive oil. And then I'll kind of swirl it around there to cover everything. And if you freeze these freeze beautifully. And olive oil, obviously, when it's refrigerated, becomes a lot more solid at room temperature. And obviously when it freezes kind of a pale, opaque green color. But hopefully you guys can see how that's mostly been covered in olive oil. And then these lids just snap down. And then the only way to open this is on this side. You have to tear this lip in order to open the container. So basically this is now tamper-proof. And obviously you want them to be just full enough, because if they're too full, it's gonna cause stuff to squish out and compromise the seal, and you don't want that either. And I'm just wiping off a little bit of, anytime there's a little bit of pesto on the rim, doing my best to clean that off so that the presentation looks good. And I like to do front side and then back side. It seems to be the best way to keep things from sliding out from under me. And this is enough, 6 ounces is enough to do a pound of pasta if you thin it out with some of your pasta water. And so this is essentially enough for 7 pounds of pasta. Very nice. And because this is a refrigerated product, I need to make this and then get them stashed in the fridge within 2 hours. And then I say the shelf life on these is 7 days. And so they need to be frozen or eaten within 7 days of fridge. All right, you guys, here you go. 7 containers of beautiful sun-dried tomato pesto. This is summer in a jar. Give this recipe a try, tribe. Thanks for watching, tribe. If you like this kind of content, give me a thumbs up, subscribe, leave me a comment, and share. I have new content coming out every week.